High above the toxic ash clouds of Outpost 7, a magnificent bioengineered apex predator plummeted from an extraction cruiser discarded like defective machinery by the conglomerate that created her. She was meant to rot in the rust wastes. Instead, a little girl offered her a bruised apple and changed history. Gravity was a cruel master to a creature born to conquer it. Specimen 734, classified by Genesis. Biometals as a Class 5 atmospheric siege asset, slammed into the metallic dunes of the rust wastes with a force that shattered the sound barrier. The impact cratered the earth, sending plumes of oxidized iron and pulverized concrete hundreds of feet into the smog-choked air of Etheria 9. Aboard the ascending corporate cruiser, Regional Director Weston Taggart barely glanced out the viewport. He calmly tapped his datapad, signing off on the asset's disposal. Incineration of the defective unit would have required an expenditure of 400 standard credits in plasma fuel. Taggart muttered to his adjutant, a stiff-backed man named Arthur Pendleton. The beast's neural link severed during the skirmish with the rebel faction. Its wings are crushed, and its bioreactor is offline. Let the scavengers have it. It's a write-off for the fiscal quarter. Taggart's decision was a stark reflection of real-world corporate apathy, a mindset where a living, breathing, and thinking creature was reduced to a mere line item on a balance sheet. Specimen 734 was not a mindless drone. She possessed a complex, localized neural network capable of deep emotional processing and tactical problem-solving. But to Genesis Biometals, she was simply obsolete hardware. Down in the crater, the dragon lay motionless. Her form was a breathtaking synthesis of biology and engineering. Shimmering titanium-laced scales covered a muscular body the size of a heavy transport shuttle. Her wings, once capable of catching the electromagnetic currents of the planet's upper atmosphere, were brutally mangled, the carbon fiber skeletal struts jutting awkwardly through torn biometric membranes. She was bleeding. It wasn't the thick red blood of a terrestrial mammal, but a luminescent cerulean synthetic fluid that hissed as it touched the acidic soil. She closed her massive, slitted golden eyes. The pain was absolute, an all-consuming fire that radiated from her shattered spine. She knew her creators had left her. The telepathic tether that usually buzzed in her mind with cold, calculated commands was gone, replaced by a deafening, terrifying silence. For the first time in her artificial life, she was alone. She waited for the darkness to claim her, knowing that without her bioreactor functioning, her cellular regeneration would fail. 3 days passed. The toxic rains of Etheria 9 washed over her immobile form, cooling her dying systems. On the 4th morning, Amani Rogers went scavenging. Amani was 8 years old, with dirt smudged across her cheeks and hair the color of rusted wire tied back in a messy braid. She wore oversized patched coveralls and a rebreather mask slung around her neck. Her father, Dr. Thomas Rogers, was a low-level atmospheric filtration engineer for the colony. He worked 16-hour shifts just to keep the hab blocks breathing, leaving Amani to wander the relatively safe parameters of the scrapyards. She was a solitary child, a ghost haunting the graveyard of discarded corporate tech, looking for copper coils and unbroken glass to build her own little inventions. That morning, the metallic scent of cerulean blood drew her away from her usual paths. She scrambled up a massive dune of discarded plasteel plating and froze. In the valley below lay a monster. Amani dropped her canvas scavenging bag. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The colony schools taught the children about the siege beasts, terrifying weapons deployed by the corporations to quell riots and secure mining rights. They were nightmares made flesh, yet as Amani stared down at the massive creature, she didn't see a nightmare. She saw the ragged rise and fall of the creature's chest. She saw the twisted, broken wings. She heard a low, rattling wheeze escaping the dragon's maw. The creature was suffering. Slowly fighting every instinct of self-preservation, Amani slid down the dune. The loose scrap clattered noisily, and the dragon's massive head twitched. A single golden eye cracked open. Specimen 734 saw the tiny human approaching. Her targeting subroutines flickered weakly to life, projecting a threat assessment across her optical nerve. Human, unarmed. Mass 24 kilograms. Threat level 0. The dragon lacked the strength to even bare her razor-sharp teeth. She simply watched, a profound sense of resignation settling over her. She expected the child to run to alert the adult humans who would come with laser cutters and salvage her titanium scales. Instead, Amani stopped 2 feet from the dragon's massive snout. Up close, the creature was beautiful. Her scales shifted in color from deep obsidian to an iridescent violet in the dim light. "You're broken," Amani whispered, her voice barely carrying over the wind. The dragon let out a long, shuddering exhale, a puff of harmless, warm air that smelled of ozone and copper. Amani unclipped a small, insulated metal box from her belt. It was her lunchbox. Food on Etheria 9 was heavily rationed. Most colonists survived on tasteless nutrient paste, but today was special. It was Amani's birthday, and her father had spent a week's wages on the black market to get her real food. Inside the box was half a ham, and synthetic cheese sandwich, and a small, slightly bruised, earth-grown apple. The child broke the sandwich in 2. She stepped closer, placing the larger half and the apple directly beneath the dragon's nostrils. "You have to eat," Amani said firmly, her tone mirroring the way her father spoke to her when she was sick. "If you don't eat, your gears will stop turning." Specimen 734 stared at the offering. Her olfactory sensors analyzed the biomatter. It was a meager amount of calories, mathematically insufficient to restart her bioreactor. But it wasn't the nutritional value that triggered a change within the beast. It was the act itself. In her entire existence, spanning hundreds of combat drops and brutal subjugation missions, no human had ever offered her anything. She had only known the sting of electro-whips, the cold injection of combat stimulants, and the harsh, overriding commands of her handlers. This tiny, fragile creature was sacrificing her own vital sustenance. Using the last dregs of her strength, the dragon extended a long, forked tongue and carefully swept the food into her mouth. She swallowed it whole. Amani smiled, a bright, genuine expression that seemed to cut through the oppressive gloom of the scrapyard. "I'm Amani. I'm going to call you Clementine, because your eyes look like the oranges in my father's old picture books." The dragon. Clementine closed her eyes, a low, rumbling purr vibrating deep within her chest. For the first time, she did not feel like a weapon. Down in the dark, silent chambers of her engineered biology, the emotional catalyst sparked, a dormant fail-safe. The profound shock of receiving unprompted compassion triggered a rush of endorphins and adrenaline, kickstarting a chemical chain reaction. Deep within her chest cavity, the bioreactor flickered back online. Over the next 3 weeks, a dangerous and beautiful routine was established in the rust wastes. Every afternoon, Amani would sneak out of Hab Block D, her canvas bag heavy not with scavenged metal, but with stolen rations. She brought nutrient-paced scraps of synthetic meat from the colony's disposal chutes and canteens of purified water. She would sit beside Clementine's massive head, chattering endlessly about her day, her father's stressful job, and her dreams of one day seeing a real ocean. Clementine listened. The dragon's cognitive processes freed from the restrictive firewalls of her corporate handlers, began to expand and evolve. She learned Amani's language. She learned the child's scent, the rhythm of her heartbeat, and the cadence of her laughter. As her bioreactor slowly generated power, her regenerative nanites went to work. The cerulean blood clotted and formed thick metallic scabs. The shattered carbon fiber struts in her wings began to knit themselves back together in a slow, agonizing process. Clementine could not yet fly, but by the end of the second week, she could stand. When she first rose to her full height, towering over the scrap dunes, Amani had clapped her hands in sheer delight. However, secrets on Etheria 9 rarely stayed buried. 50 miles away, in the gleaming, climate-controlled spire of Genesis Biometals, Weston Taggart was facing a crisis of his own making. The corporation's stock had taken a massive hit after the disastrous rebel skirmish. Worse, a rival pharmaceutical conglomerate had patented a new biosynthetic neural mesh, rendering Genesis's current tech obsolete. Taggart sat in his plush office, sweating through his tailored suit. His chief scientist, Dr. Aris Thorne, a name best forgotten, replaced here by Dr. Gregory Houseman, projected a holographic schematic onto the glass desk. "Sir, we need a pristine, Class 5 neural core to reverse engineer the rival company's mesh. Doctor," Houseman explained, adjusting his spectacles. "Manufacturing a new one will take 5 years and billions of credits." Taggart scowled. "We don't have 5 years. The board is threatening to liquidate my division by the end of the month." Houseman hesitated. "There is an alternative. Specimen 734. The asset you ordered jettisoned over Sector 4. The neural core resides deep within the cranial cavity. It is housed in a shock-proof, stasis-locked titanium vault. Even if the beast died on impact, the core will remain perfectly preserved for up to a decade. We just need to go extract it." Taggart's eyes narrowed. He remembered the 400 credits he had saved by not incinerating the beast. At the time, it had been a ruthless, pragmatic flex of his authority. Now it was his salvation. "Assemble a recovery team," Taggart ordered, slamming his fist onto the desk. "Send Captain Wood and his elite private military unit. Tell them to bring heavy cutting gear. I want that dragon's head brought to my laboratory by midnight. And if scavengers have found it," Houseman asked. "Then Wood has authorization to clean up the mess," Taggart replied coldly. "No witnesses. Genesis Biometals owns that scrapyard and everything in it." Back in the rust wastes, the sky was a bruised purple, threatening an acid storm. Amani was sitting cross-legged on a piece of corrugated steel, reading aloud from a tattered physical book her father had given her. Clementine lay beside her, her massive body curled protectively around the child to shield her from the biting wind. Suddenly, Clementine's head snapped up, her golden eyes dilated. Through the thick smog, the rhythmic, heavy thumping of military-grade hover transports echoed across the dunes. Clementine's acoustic sensors immediately identified the acoustic signatures: 2 Genesis Biometals dropships, heavily armed with rotary plasma cannons. Her dormant threat assessment subroutines flared to life. Hostiles inbound. Heavy ordnance detected. Clementine let out a low, warning growl. The sound vibrated through the metal plates beneath Amani's feet. "What is it, Clem?" Amani asked, standing up and clutching her book to her chest. Before the dragon could react, blinding searchlights cut through the gloom, pinning them both in a harsh white glare. The dropships descended their thrusters, kicking up a massive cloud of rust and dust. Out of the swirling debris marched Captain Jason Wood, flanked by 12 heavily armored corporate mercenaries carrying thermal rifles. Wood stepped forward, his boots crunching loudly on the scrap. He stopped staring in utter disbelief. He had expected to find a rotting carcass. Instead, he found a fully active Class 5 siege asset, standing tall and lethal with a small, terrified human child standing directly beneath its jaw. "Well, I'll be damned," Wood muttered over his comms channel. "Command, the asset is alive. I repeat, Specimen 734 is functional, and she's got a civilian pet." In the command center, Taggart's voice crackled through Wood's earpiece. "I don't care if it's alive, Captain. The objective remains the same. The core is worth more than the beast itself. Put it down. Lethal force authorized." Wood grinned beneath his visor. "Roger that." He raised his hand, signaling his men to fan out and aim their thermal rifles at the dragon's chest. "Hey!" Amani shouted, stepping out from beneath Clementine's shadow. Her small voice was shaking, but she stood her ground, spreading her arms wide. "Leave her alone. She's not hurting anyone." Wood let out a harsh laugh. "Kid, you have 5 seconds to walk away from corporate property, or you're going to get caught in the crossfire." Clementine's optical sensors locked onto Wood. The dragon processed the aggressive posture, the rising thermal output of the mercenaries' weapons, and the direct threat to Amani. For the first time in her existence, Clementine did not wait for a command. She did not receive an encrypted authorization to engage. She made a choice. A deep, resonating hum began to build within her chest. The cerulean lines running between her titanium scales flared with blinding, brilliant light. Her bioreactor, fueled by weeks of care and a bond deeper than any programming, pushed her energy output to a staggering 140%. Amani felt the heat radiating from her friend. She looked up and saw Clementine's jaw open, a swirling vortex of blue plasma gathering in the back of her throat. The corporate mercenaries had come to harvest a broken machine. They were about to learn in the most devastating way possible the fatal consequence of discarding a living weapon and the terrifying power of a dragon protecting the only person who had ever shown her kindness. Captain Jason Wood barely had time to register the blinding, cerulean glow before the rust wastes erupted into an inferno. The vortex of superheated plasma that tore from Clementine's maw was not a wild, uncontrolled burst. Guided by her newly liberated neural network, the dragon calculated the exact thermal output required to instantly vaporize military-grade plasteel without generating a shockwave that would harm Amani. A beam of blinding blue energy struck the lead dropship dead center. The heavy transport, heavily armored with alloys derived from the legacy schematics of Lockheed Martin's ancient terrestrial exo division, simply ceased to exist. The titanium hull flash-melted into raining slag. The secondary ammunition reserves detonated in a series of concussive booms, sending a shockwave of displaced air that knocked the remaining corporate mercenaries off their feet. Wood was thrown backward into a mound of rusted engine blocks, his thermal rifle clattering away into the darkness. "Fire, bring it down!" Wood screamed over the deafening roar of the flames, scrambling to his knees and drawing his sidearm. The surviving mercenaries opened fire. Red streaks of thermal energy painted the toxic smog impacting Clementine's massive form. Before her awakening, these strikes would have sent her into a submissive shock state, governed by her corporate pain compliance protocols. Now the localized burns barely registered. Her bioreactor, surging with unprecedented energy, driven by the raw mammalian instinct to protect her young charge, reinforced her scales with an electromagnetic deflector shield. The thermal rounds dissipated against her hide, like raindrops on a hot skillet. Clementine let out a roar that shook the very bedrock of Etheria 9. It was a sound of absolute defiance, a localized sonic weapon that shattered the optical visors of the mercenaries' helmets and shorted out their comms links. Amani huddled beneath the dragon's massive foreleg, her hands clamped over her ears. She wasn't crying. Through the terrifying display of overwhelming force, she looked up and saw Clementine's golden eye glance down at her. In that fleeting second, the creature's gaze was not that of a cold-blooded weapon, but of a fierce, protective guardian. With her wings fully healed and coursing with power, Clementine lunged. She did not use her plasma breath again. She didn't need to. She became a blur of titanium claws and devastating kinetic mass. She swiped her massive tail, shattering the landing struts of the second dropship and sending it toppling into the scrap dunes. She pinned 2 fleeing mercenaries to the ground with a single massive paw, not crushing them, but embedding her claws deep enough into the earth to trap them in their rigid armor. Wood, realizing the battle was completely lost in under 60 seconds, turned and ran. He punched a desperate code into his wristcom. Command, we are wiped out. The asset is a rogue anomaly, requesting immediate orbital strike on my coordinates. High above in the Genesis Biometal Spire, Regional Director Weston Taggart watched the catastrophic telemetry data flood his holographic displays. His elite extraction team, an investment of over 3 million standard credits, had been neutralized by a piece of defective hardware. Orbital strike denied, Captain. Taggart spat into his console, his face pale with panic. An orbital strike would vaporize the neural core, fall back and re-engage. With what? Wood's voice shrieked back, accompanied by the sound of tearing metal. It just ripped the primary plasma cannon off the gunship with its bare teeth. It's over, Taggart, we're dead. The comms line went dead in a burst of static. Down in the scrapyard, Clementine stood victorious amidst the burning wreckage. The surviving mercenaries were fleeing into the smog, their morale completely broken. She let them go. Her primary objective, protecting the tiny human who had shared her birthday lunch, was achieved. Clementine lowered her massive head to the ground, allowing Amani to step out from beneath her. The little girl was trembling, covered in a fine layer of soot, but entirely unharmed. "You did it, Clem," Amani whispered, reaching out to press her small, dirty palm against the dragon's snout. "You saved me." Clementine rumbled the vibration, traveling up Amani's arm. Then the dragon shifted her posture. She crouched low to the ground, extended her right wing to form a makeshift ramp, and looked pointedly at her own back. Amani gasped. "You want me to get on?" The dragon blinked her golden eyes once. Without hesitation, Amani scrambled up the metallic membrane of the wing, settling herself into a naturally recessed groove between 2 thick, armor-plated dorsal ridges just behind the creature's neck. It was a perfectly secure hollow, insulated from the wind and heat. With a mighty flex of her reconstructed carbon fiber struts, Clementine pushed off the ground. The thrust of her wings kicked up a miniature hurricane of rust and ash. For the first time since she was discarded, the Leviathan took to the skies, ascending rapidly through the toxic clouds of Etheria 9, carrying a little girl toward the stars. In his penthouse office, Weston Taggart's world was violently unraveling. The disaster in the rust wastes was bad, but the consequences were terminal. By dispatching a private military unit into a civilian zone and authorizing lethal force near a colonial settlement, Taggart had violated the Vanguard BlackRock Planetary Accords, the strict real-world-style treaties that kept the megacorporations from turning the colonies into outright war zones. Worse, he had done it on an unencrypted channel. His office door hissed open, and Dr. Houseman rushed in, clutching a datapad like a lifeline. "Sir, we have a massive breach. The Colonial Governor's Office intercepted Captain Wood's distress call. They have the audio of you authorizing lethal force on a civilian child to retrieve company property." Taggart's heart slammed against his ribs. "Shut down the servers. Purge the local network." "It's too late," Houseman said, his voice trembling. "The board of directors just convened an emergency holographic summit. They are liquidating the division to avoid colonial sanctions. You are being officially disavowed, Mr. Taggart. Colony security forces are already in the elevator lobby." Taggart stared at the scientist, the absolute gravity of the situation sinking in. He had traded humanity for profit, and now the ledger was balancing. "I have a private cruiser on the roof," Taggart said, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper. "I can make it to the off-world orbital station. I have offshore accounts." He didn't wait for Houseman's reply. Taggart bolted from the office, sprinting up the emergency stairwell to the executive landing pad. The sleek aerodynamic stealth cruiser sat waiting, its engines already idling. Taggart threw himself into the pilot's seat, bypassing the pre-flight checks, and slammed the thrusters to maximum. The ship shot into the bruised purple sky like a silver bullet, breaking the cloud cover in seconds. Taggart let out a breathless, manic laugh. He had escaped. He would lose his status, but with his stolen wealth, he could disappear into the outer colonies. His relief lasted exactly 12 seconds. The ship's proximity alarms shrieked. A massive shadow eclipsed the cockpit. Taggart looked up through the reinforced plasteel canopy. Hovering directly above his ascending ship, silhouetted against the twin moons of Etheria 9, was Specimen 734. The Dragon's wingspan blotted out the stars, and sitting securely on her back, strapped down by a makeshift harness of scavenged cabling, was the little girl with the rusted wire hair. Clementine's targeting systems locked onto the stealth cruiser. She identified the thermal signature in the cockpit, Weston Taggart. The man whose digital signature had flooded her brain with agonizing electrical shocks during her training. The man who had ordered her dropped into the wastes to die slowly. The Dragon didn't use her plasma. That would be too quick. Instead, Clementine folded her wings and executed a terrifying high-velocity dive. She slammed feet first into the hull of the cruiser. Her titanium claws tore through the advanced composite armor like wet paper. She gripped the main thruster manifolds, ripping the fuel injectors clean out of their housings. Sparks showered the atmosphere. The cruiser's engines choked, sputtered, and died. Taggart screamed as all power failed in his ship. The gravity dampeners shut off, leaving him in sudden, terrifying freefall. Clementine let go of the doomed vessel. She banked gracefully away, her massive wings catching the upper atmospheric currents, stabilizing effortlessly. From her back, Amani watched wide-eyed as the sleek corporate ship plummeted back down toward the planet's surface. The fall of Weston Taggart. Altitude 15,000 feet. Destination Sector 4. Rust wastes. Status completely powerless. The cruiser hit the scrap dunes with a deafening crunch, sliding for a mile through rusted hulls and razor-sharp metal debris before slamming into a canyon of discarded industrial machinery. Taggart survived the crash, the executive safety restraints deployed perfectly. But as he kicked open the jammed cockpit door and dragged his bruised, bleeding body out onto the acidic soil, the true horror of his situation dawned on him. He was in the exact center of the Sector 4 scrap yard. Both of his legs were fractured from the impact. His comms unit was completely destroyed. The toxic smog-filled air burned his lungs, and he had no rebreather. He looked up at the sky. Through a break in the clouds, he saw the distant, shimmering silhouette of the Dragon flying freely away from the planet, guided by the child she had sworn to protect. Taggart pulled himself a few feet across the dirt, his expensive suit tearing on the jagged metal. A low, rattling sound caught his attention. He turned his head. From behind a dune of plasteel, a pack of feral cybernetic scavenger hounds emerged, their optical sensors glowing a hungry red in the gloom. They smelled the synthetic fluids leaking from his ship. They smelled blood. Weston Taggart had discarded a living, feeling creature into this hellish wasteland purely to save 400 credits. Now the universe had presented him with the exact same bill. and karma always collects. High above the stratosphere breaking orbit into the clean, silent vacuum of space, Clementine activated her internal life support fields, enveloping Amani in a warm, breathable bubble of oxygen. Amani leaned forward, wrapping her arms as far around the dragon's warm, armored neck as she could reach. "Where are we going, Clem?" The dragon let out a soft, echoing purr that resonated in Amani's mind. She didn't have vocal cords for human speech, but the neural connection they had forged through simple kindness transcended language. Clementine projected an image directly into Amani's thoughts, a distant blue and green planet with vast, deep oceans of clean water and skies free of toxic ash. A place where a broken dragon and a scavenger girl could finally rest. Amani smiled, closing her eyes as the stars rushed past them. I'd like that. I'd like that very much. If you were captivated by this science fiction tale of humanity, empathy, and absolute karma, please hit that like button and share this story with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss another thrilling adventure from the stars. Your support helps us bring more incredible sci-fi and fantasy stories to life. Leave a comment below, telling us what you would feed a broken dragon. Thank you for watching.